Michael, let me just turn to that and pick up on, Charles's assertion about, Christianity as a worldview. And I know you see traditional religious beliefs as an important lens through understanding humanity, that it is an important part of understanding history and understanding the human condition. But does this ultimately boil down to you for a relativist position that, there's a lot of different ways of accessing reality? Or is it okay to say that, Charles is entitled to his reality, but I have a different one? Or do we have a third thing that, again, for somebody who may even be further distances, well, let's do an empirical examination or a horse race about which one could be more true. How do you think about this?
Yeah, and it's a wonderful question, and I would characteristically think of it very much from a Confucian point of view in this case. And not surprisingly, exactly. And the way Confucius would put it is very intriguing. He would argue that one of our dangers as human beings is we tend to fall into sort of patterns of behavior that we just endlessly repeat, and that we actually live our lives very differently from what we often claim we're doing. So we may have great ideals that we think we're living by, but in practice we're just sort of playing out the same patterns over and over again. And what interests him is therefore that we self-consciously do things to break us out of that. So he's, for example, very interested in rituals, but rituals in a very specific sense. So rituals in which you create these spaces in which you have to become a very different type of person to break you out of your standard ways of acting. And the argument isn't that the way you act in these rituals is necessarily better. He's really interested in that break, like breaking from your patterns, seeing the world from a different way, and therefore in practice beginning to live your life in a more effective way, and then think of your life as doing this constantly. Now, this may seem like a really bizarre way to answer your question, but the reason I begin this way is to say what he would care about, and I would very much agree with him on this case, is that's really what matters. In other words, if he's right, and I think empirically he is, that this is one of our dangers as human beings, what we need are these breaks, things that break us out of these ruts, that break us out of these ruts, help us to see the world in better ways, help us to transform our lives such that we are living them in more effective ways and ways that help others for the better. What those breaks will be for us will indeed vary dramatically. Absolutely, religions can and have been incredibly important in doing these. But of course, from a Confucian point of view, since there's no pre-commitment to what is ultimately correct, the argument isn't, well, should I argue this worldview is correct and this one is wrong? Again, he would be completely agnostic about that. He would say, if things you do force that break in a good way, continue doing them. And so I think hearing exactly what Charles, what you've been saying, I think this is wonderful. Like, clearly your faith is creating those breaks that are allowing you to live your life incredibly effectively. From a Confucian point of view, even without a pre-commitment to saying that worldview is correct, the argument would be wonderful. In other words, it's clearly helping you to live your life incredibly effectively, and as long as that is what religion is doing, which is what religion does at its best, it is wonderful. So getting back to your question, the claim would not be, should we choose which worldview is correct? The argument is, if you have a worldview that creates a complacent world that we just take for granted, that doesn't break us out of our standard patterns, that becomes just sort of things we say but don't really put into practice, that's the danger. If, on the contrary, you're doing things, what Confucius would call ritual, that break us, that help us transform, that help us become better human beings, that's what we're looking for. And so you're not looking for the content of the claim so much, although that's important, but what really matters is, are we doing things that allow us to live our lives effectively? And religion can be an incredibly important way to do so.